My producer, who hails from Australia, Samara Gill, has been looking into this case, and obviously she's well aware of how gripped by this saga Australia is. Where are we at, Samara? They're still looking, but no sign.
Look, I mean, Australia's outback can be very beautiful, but very merciless. I knew quite a few people that lived in those sort of desolate lands where all you can see is just barren earth for miles and miles and miles. And this is where this boy has been lost. And this is where this really takes place. It's quite eerie. It's quite a creepy environment if you think about it. And I just think of the sun sort of setting on that dark desert and the family not seeing their son and him still being lost. I mean, it's been about 2 weeks now. A lot
Two
of
and a half, just
two and a
over
half,
that,
yeah. And the police are saying, you know, it's pretty unlikely that when we do find him, if we ever do, that he'll be alive. Now, there is still hope. There is still hope. They said
the Australian outback contains many kinds of quiet. There is the hush of the midday heat, a dense shroud that stifles sound. There is the calm of night, interrupted only by the far-off cry of a curlew. But the silence that descended on Oak Park Station that fateful afternoon was unlike those others. It was not a natural hush but an absence, a hollow where the sound of a 4-year-old boy's laughter ought to have been. It was just before 5 p.m., the golden hour when the harsh Queensland sun begins to mellow, throwing long, dramatic shadows across the wide, isolated cattle property. To Margaret Lamont, the picture was one of ordinary peace. Her grandson, Augustus Gus Lamont, played on the homestead veranda, a small, lively shape against weathered timber and the ageless landscape. The tableau was a portrait of rural normality, a moment so commonplace it would later be remembered with a sense of profound betrayal. A grandmother's brief glance away, a second spent on a household task, a half-heard conversation, a momentary lapse in the constant watchfulness that childcare demands, was all it took. When Margaret looked back toward the veranda, it was empty. The toys remained. The outline of where he had been sitting might still have lingered in the mind's eye. But Gus was gone. The first calls brought back only the whispering wind. Rapid checks of his favorite hiding places turned up nothing. A family sweep of the immediate homestead grounds produced no trace. This was not a child tucked behind a couch. This was a vanishing into a vast and ancient terrain. Within an hour, the first police units had arrived, and the peaceful outback station was converted into the center of a modern nightmare, a puzzle that would, in the days and weeks ahead, resist every rational explanation and reveal the limits of human inquiry when faced with the unknown. The reaction was swift and enormous. A missing child triggers a primal alarm, and the resources mobilized by the Queensland Police Service underscored the seriousness of the case. Task Force Horizon was formed, a specialized team of detectives, forensic experts, and search and rescue coordinators devoted solely to finding Gus Lamont. They were immediately faced with a stark, terrifying fact. The protocols of urban investigation did not translate here. Oak Park Station stretches across hundreds of thousands of acres of classic Gulf country, a harsh patchwork of sun-baked clay pans, thick scrub, dry creek channels, and jagged limestone ridges. It is a landscape that can disorient the inexperienced and be merciless to the vulnerable. The search perimeter, set up within hours of Gus's disappearance, was enormous in scale, eventually covering more than 60,000 hectares. For 9 agonizing days, the outback's silence was shattered by the unrelenting drone of human endeavor. On the ground, lines of state emergency service volunteers and police officers advanced in painstaking grid formations, their eyes combing the cracked soil for a scrap of cloth, a disturbed stone, any sign that might break the spell. They contended with oppressive heat, tangled undergrowth, and the psychological burden of the mission. Alongside them, specialist tracking dogs swept the country, their powerful noses pursuing a scent trail that seemed to have been cut by an invisible force. From the air, technology joined the search. Police helicopters fitted with sophisticated thermal imaging equipment crisscrossed the property, their cameras hunting for the heat signature of a small body. Drones, nimble and persistent, buzzed over ground inaccessible to search teams, collecting thousands of high-resolution images and video feeds that would later be examined pixel by pixel. It was a search operation of unparalleled scope for the region, a Herculean combination of boot-leather persistence and cutting-edge technology. And then, what appeared to be a breakthrough. Roughly 500 meters north of the homestead, a sharp-eyed searcher spotted a single, clear impression in the red earth. It was a child's footprint, small and perfectly formed, a heartbreaking evidence of a little boy's passage. For the search teams, it was a guiding light. It suggested that Gus had, as feared, simply wandered away. The print pointed north, away from the homestead and into the wide, open wilderness. A concentrated push of effort was sent along that bearing. But the hope was brief. The story the ground told was frustratingly short. There was no second print. No scuff, no broken twig, no abandoned toy. The trail did not thin out. It simply stopped. It was as if Gus had taken that one step and then been lifted from the surface of the earth. The single footprint became not an answer, but the investigation's first great, perplexing mystery. As the physical search continued to turn up nothing, investigators began to scrutinize witness accounts, hunting for any oddity, any flicker of detail that could reset their bearings. In a follow-up interview with Margaret Lamond, a new, potentially crucial detail emerged, a memory that had surfaced from the trauma of that afternoon. She recalled that earlier that day, before Gus vanished, she had heard the distinct sound of a motorbike. It was distant, but in the profound stillness of the outback, its presence was conspicuous. She could not place a direction or an exact time, only the auditory memory itself, the sputter of a single-cylinder engine, a foreign noise in that specific context at that specific moment. In a remote place like Oak Park, the sound of a vehicle is as telling as a fingerprint. It denotes human presence, movement, intent. This transformed the story from one of a child who wandered off into one that potentially involved another human actor. The motorbike became the phantom in the investigation, a presence that could not be proven, yet could not be dismissed. Task Force Horizon initiated a parallel line of inquiry. They cross-checked property records, interviewed every station hand and neighbor within a huge radius, and painstakingly re-examined the terrain for tire marks that could not be explained by known vehicles. The outcome was emphatically negative. No unregistered or unexplained motorbikes were found. No mysterious tire tracks turned up in the larger search area beyond those left by the searchers themselves. No other witness could confirm having heard the engine. The motorbike existed only in Margaret Lamond's recollection. Was it the crucial key, the method by which an abductor had approached and left with terrifying speed? Or was it a textbook instance of traumatic memory, where the mind, in its desperate attempt to make sense of the senseless, latches onto an unrelated ambient sound and gives it a meaning it did not merit? Investigators were now chasing a sound, a phantom echo on the wind that led them down a path as barren as the first. The uncertainty deepened days later when a second possible footprint was discovered an extraordinary 3.5 kilometers from the homestead. The distance was, for a 4-year-old, virtually impossible. The terrain between the homestead and that location was rugged and overgrown, a severe challenge for any adult. Yet the mere possibility demanded investigation. Forensic examination, however, was conclusive. The print was judged unlikely to be a child's. Its size, depth, and tread all indicated it had been made by an adult, most likely one of the hundreds of searchers who had by then traversed the property. Another door slammed shut. But the whisper of the idea persisted. What if they were wrong? What if that impossible distance had been covered not by a small child's steps, but astride a phantom motorbike? While Task Force Horizon wrestled with forensic facts and witness testimony, a parallel probe unfolded in the digital public square. The story of the little boy lost in the outback seized the national imagination. The hashtag #FindLittleGus trended on social media, a modern beacon of collective hope and anxiety. Candlelight vigils were organized. Donations poured in to support the family and volunteer efforts. At first, the public narrative was one of united sympathy. The image of a grieving grandmother, clinging to fragile strength, became the face of the tragedy. Margaret Lamond's public pleas were met with a tidal wave of support, she was portrayed as the heart of a family living every parent's worst nightmare. Online forums filled with messages of solace. That poor woman, her strength is incredible, and we stand with the Lamont family. But as days stretched into a week and the ground search produced nothing but one inexplicable footprint, the online atmosphere began to turn sour. The same platforms that had carried hope became arenas for suspicion and armchair sleuthing. Attention increasingly fixed on Margaret Lamont herself. Her composure in televised interviews was analyzed not for resilience, but for perceived inconsistency. "Does anyone else find her calm unsettling?" became a recurring remark. The motorbike memory was dissected not as a potential lead, but as a possible diversion. Why is she dwelling on a sound she can't even verify? "It seems like she's trying to shift the focus away from the house," one commenter speculated. The public split into camps: defenders who saw a grieving family victimized by circumstance, and skeptics who believed that the absence of evidence was itself evidence of something darker closer to home. This division was not driven by new police findings, but by the human mind's intolerance for an information vacuum. The unknown had to be filled, and in the absence of facts, conjecture rushed in. As the ground search was wound down, the character of the investigation fundamentally changed. Focus shifted from the vast open country of Oak Park Station to the clinical, data-rich rooms of the forensic and intelligence units. This became a ghost hunt in the digital realm, an effort to find a trace of Gus in the invisible pathways of modern life. Every piece of technology was exploited. Mobile phone tower data across the region was scrutinized for any unusual pings, an unknown device entering and leaving the area around the time of the disappearance. Those results were another dead end. No anomalous activity was detected. It was as though the Outback had swallowed not only a boy, but his digital echo too. Forensic teams examined the homestead and its immediate surroundings with microscopic intensity. They searched for any sign of a struggle, any tiny speck of blood, any evidence of drag marks or disturbance indicative of foul play. The results were, once more, unequivocally negative. There was no blood, no DNA from unknown individuals, no signs of a confrontation. Specialists also assessed the scene for evidence of animal predation, a grim but essential line of inquiry given the remoteness. That, too, was dismissed. The total absence of biological material such as hair, clothing fragments, or bone rendered such a scenario statistically negligible. The investigation now confronted a phenomenon as baffling as it was frightening: the complete and utter absence of evidence. In the 21st century, with all its forensic and technological prowess, a child apparently could disappear without leaving a single coherent trace beyond one solitary footprint. This was not merely a missing person case. It was a paradox. Theories began to take shape to fill that vacuum, each more disturbing than the last. Officially and appropriately, every possibility remained open. Unofficially, investigators and the public were left with a few deeply unsatisfying scenarios. The first, and initially most plausible, was accidental death, that Gus had wandered off, succumbed to the elements, or fallen into a concealed crevice, and his body had not been located. This theory justified the extensive land searches. Yet the failure of that search, combined with the expertise of trackers and the capabilities of thermal technology, made this explanation increasingly hard to hold. The Outback is vast, but it is not a void. Trained searchers and modern tech are remarkably effective at finding what is there to be found. That led to a second and more sinister possibility: abduction. The motorbike recollection was the tantalizing centerpiece of that hypothesis. Could an opportunist, or someone who had been observing the property, have seized an extraordinary moment? The act would have had to be executed with speed and a chilling cleanliness. It could explain the lack of a continuous trail, the absence of a body, and the motorbike sound. But it posed monumental questions of its own. Why kidnap a child from a remote cattle station where the chance of being seen, however small, was significant? How did an abductor know Gus would be alone on that veranda at that precise instant? And most perplexing of all, had they left no trace, no vehicle tracks beyond the search perimeter, no digital footprint, No witnesses beyond one unverified sound? A third, more elaborate scenario entertained an undiscovered accident on the property followed by a panicked cover-up. This was the theory that festered in the darker corners of online discussion and one police had to consider discreetly. It was constructed entirely from perceived human inconsistencies rather than physical proof. It sought to explain the absence of evidence by proposing deliberate erasure. Yet after exhaustive background checks, financial probes, and repeated interviews, no motive, no opportunity, and no credible support for such a cover-up ever emerged. It remained a theory born from the frustration of the case's impenetrability, a narrative invented to fill a void that facts could not. Today, the case of Gus Lamont remains open but largely inactive in the public consciousness, a cold file that retains a low, steady temperature of mystery. The official file has not been closed, but the frantic energy has faded, replaced by occasional reviews of old evidence. For detectives of Task Force Horizon, it is a professional scar, a puzzle they devoted weeks of their lives to resolving, only to be left with a collection of non-clues and unanswerable questions. The single footprint is preserved in photographs and casts. Witness statements sit in files. The data from phones and drones rests on servers. They wait for the one phone call, the one piece of new information that might finally make sense of it all. For the family, and especially for Margaret Lamont, the silence is a life sentence. There is no grave to visit, no closure to be had, only the perpetual, haunting limbo of not knowing. The landscape that was once their home has become a site of deep trauma, each gust of wind potentially carrying the echo of a lost laugh or the phantom rev of a motorbike engine. And for the wider public, the story of the boy who vanished from Oak Park Station endures as a chilling campfire tale for the modern era, a stark reminder that there remain shadows our brightest lights cannot pierce. It raises uncomfortable and profound questions about the reliability of memory, the limits of technology, and the terrifying prospect that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. The Outback kept it secret. The dust settled, and the file on Augustus Gus Lamont remains a monument to the most frightening verdict an investigation can return: nothing at all. The unsettling truth is that we may never know whether what occurred was a tragic accident, a flawlessly executed crime, or something else entirely, lost forever to the immense, silent heart of Australia.